I used to believe the forest was alive in the same way a house is alive, quiet, steady, unchanging unless someone breaks something. I thought I understood its rhythms, the flutter of a pine warbler, the sigh of wind through needles, the creak of a settling branch. But awe has a cruel side. The woods don't just live, they remember, and they are not passive hosts to those who walk among them. They wait. They hold their breath. They watch. My name is Jonah, 38 years old, U.S. Forest Service Ranger, and I have spent most of my career inside the granite embrace of the North Cascades. I didn't come here looking for quiet. I came here because quiet was the only thing that made sense after my father died. He used to work these trails long before I wore the badge. He swore that the forest keeps secrets safer than any vault ever could. Back then, I thought he meant poachers' hides or illegal campsites. What he meant was far older and far more complicated. The locals here don't bother with campfire ghost stories. They share warnings. Advice disguised as superstition. They say don't whistle after dark unless you want something whistling back. They say if you smell iron or wet fur near the tree line, turn back. They say never enter an unmarked cave, even if you think you know where it leads. Especially then. I heard those warnings for years, smiled them away, logged them into my brain as colorful regional folklore. Rangers have to play the skeptic. If we start believing every strange noise is a monster, we'll lose the purpose of our badge, helping people feel safe. But the truth is, protecting others becomes heavier when you no longer feel protected yourself. My first year stationed here, I lived in the standard issue ranger cabin near the edge of a grove the old-timers call Weeping Pines. They're Douglas firs like any other, but when the wind blows from the east, sap collects and drips like tears, streaking their bark and leaving a bitter smell in the air. I didn't think much of it until the first night I realized the groove of sap was forming faces, distorted, asymmetrical, expressions stretching and curving like mouths frozen mid-scream. You learn not to stare at things too long in the dark. Light can protect you, but curiosity can bury you. On that early spring night, the snow still melting in piles around the cabin, I awoke to a thud against the porch. Bears were common, sure, but bears don't knock. They don't pause as if waiting for a response. The air had that chilled metallic edge that makes your bones tighten. I stepped to the window, hand resting near the radio on my belt. I didn't see anything at first. I only heard slow breathing, deep and tired, like something that had walked a great distance to arrive at my doorstep. Then came another knock, 3 taps, rhythmic, human. Every instinct in me stretched tight. I unlatched the window, bracing to shout or scare off whoever was out there. But before I could open my mouth, a voice slipped through the wood. Not loud, not aggressive, just worn, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. Help, me. No shape, no footsteps, no handprint in the thin smear of frost on the glass. Just a desperate plea drifting into the cracks of my cabin walls. I waited, breath shallow, for something more, a follow-up, a figure, a direction for the fear to go. Instead, silence pressed itself against the window like a face I couldn't see. I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was on the floor with my head between my knees, clutching the radio with fingers that had gone numb. I never called it in. Some part of me wasn't convinced that voice belonged to something human. And if it did, I wasn't sure helping it would have been the right call. Morning came and melted the terror into embarrassment. I walked the porch, scanning for footprints. Nothing. Not even a scuff of dirt on the boards. Pines swayed gently in a wind I hadn't felt all night, whispering like gossiping old men. I told myself I must have been half asleep, brain constructing a voice where there wasn't one. The mind is a stubborn animal. It wants explanations. It hates loose ends. But that wasn't the last time. Weeks passed. Patrols and paperwork consumed me. I learned the calls of owls and coyotes, the musky scent of bobcats, the familiar darkness of these woods. My boots wore grooves in the trails, yet something had changed. The silence wasn't silence anymore. At night, every lull felt like something waiting for me to relax, lose vigilance, breathe too loud. Then came my first missing hiker. His name was Thomas, local kid, mid-20s, camping with friends not far from Blue Feather Ridge. They found his tent empty in the morning, his pack too. No sign of struggle, no drag marks, nothing. That alone didn't alarm me. People wander off to take a leak or explore all the time, but they usually return, and they don't leave their shoes behind. His boots sat neatly beside his sleeping pad, socks tucked in like he was preparing for bedtime. According to his friends, he wouldn't have walked barefoot. Not at night, not around that terrain. It was rocky, cold, wild. He hated the feeling of gravel on his soles. We searched for 2 days. Dogs, drones, foot teams. I hiked the ridge and found a ravine with a narrow drop, difficult but not impossible to traverse. I radioed in and descended. At the bottom, sunlight rarely touched the earth. The air smelled wrong. Not decay or moisture exactly, more like burnt hair and iron. I scanned the dirt for tracks. A person's foot leaves a shape, an animal's paw leaves a pattern, but what I found had neither clarity nor logic. Impressions spaced far apart, like something stepping only once every 2 yards. A long drag trailing behind the prints, as if the ground itself was resisting. My pulse hammered so loudly I thought for sure something would hear it. I followed the markings until they simply stopped, mid-ravine, as though whatever had been here had vanished into the rock. I felt watched. Cold slid into my lungs like inhaling fear directly. Then, crack, above me, a stone tumbling from the ridge. Instinctively, I looked up, half expecting Thomas to be standing there barefoot and dazed. But what I saw instead was the shadow of towering legs slipping behind a boulder. Not human legs, too thick, too tall, moving with a soundless agility no deer could mimic. I shouted, radio crackling, voice trembling, "Search team, I've got movement." But by the time reinforcements arrived, there were no prints, no drag marks, no shadow, only a silence so unnatural it made my skin feel inside out. Thomas was never found. People blamed the cliffs, the cold, his own recklessness. I blamed my memory, wondering if fear had warped what I saw. But a part of me knew I had glimpsed something that did not belong to the charts, the wildlife logs, or any species biology has bothered to name. That night, same 3 knocks on my cabin door, same shaky breath slipping beneath the wood. Help me. But this time, my radio wasn't in my hand. The only thing I gripped was the truth. Trouble in this forest wasn't always human, and saving others might require surviving what hunts here in the dark. I didn't sleep that second night. I sat in the chair by the door, boots on, flashlight ready, even though I knew the beam would do little against a voice with no body. The knocks never came again before dawn. Just the wind fingering the gutter, and occasionally the groaning of the cabin, normal noises turned sinister by expectation. Fear only needs anticipation to survive. The morning light felt like a pardon from execution, but sunlight can't erase what you already believe in your bones. I buried myself in work, permits, trail checks, reassignments, equipment maintenance, anything to give shape to the hours. The more I tried to forget, the more the quiet stretched. And the quieter it got, the more I found myself listening for something to fill the silence. The forest has a way of making you crave normal noise. The flap of raven wings, a squirrel's shriek, even the sudden warning blow of a deer when it catches your scent, anything that tells you the world behaves as it should. But sometimes, deep among the pines, I'd hear, not that. Not wildlife, something like a distant hum, a vibration in the air without origin. The kind of sound that doesn't enter through the ears, it settles in the spine. It made me sick, dizzy, like reality had skipped a beat. I asked about it once, casually over coffee, with Ron, one of the older rangers. He'd been here for decades. Scar across his cheek, 2 missing fingertips he never explained, and a habit of looking over his shoulder even when no one was there. He stirred his mug slowly and said, "You're hearing the earth breathe. Happens sometimes." Then his eyes drifted to the window. Means it's not done yet. I laughed, but he didn't. I didn't ask again. I figured around here, people keep the truth locked behind their teeth. A month after Thomas vanished, a call came from a small campground on the west side. an area deep enough into the woods that you stop hearing highway noise. A father and his teenage daughter had been hiking the creek trail when she said something large was following them. He dismissed it as a black bear until he realized the trees weren't shaking. The noise wasn't around them, it was right behind them. Heavy, bipedal footfalls. He panicked, locked eyes with his girl, and told her to run. They sprinted the rest of the trail back to the campground. He swore he heard not one pair of legs, but two, one behind him, one behind her, as if whatever stalked them was trying to flank. The daughter insisted she heard a breath next to her ear. Hot, wet, and a faint whisper, "Don't look back." She obeyed. Her father did not. He told me later, his voice trembling while I took the report. I looked because I needed to know if my little girl was being chased by a real flesh and blood predator. But what I saw, he swallowed, throat tight. Its eyes, Jonah, its eyes were too high. And they glowed. Not reflection, glow, like something burning from inside its skull. I investigated the creek trail immediately with 2 other rangers. We found prints along the mud near the water. Not boots, not paws. The shape resembled a human foot, but broader, heavier, the toes longer. And only 2 prints, spaced 15 feet apart, as if whatever made them took giant strides then disappeared. The girl refused to hike ever again. The father packed their camper and drove away that same afternoon. I watched them go, dust trailing behind like a ghost trying to keep up. Some families leave with photos and souvenirs. Others leave trying to forget. Nights warmed as summer approached, and the nocturnal choir of insects returned. People came in droves to camp under the starlight, blissfully unaware of who else might be watching from the darker patches of sky. That's the thing about fear. It rarely announces its arrival. It hides until you're comfortable. One evening, I was dispatched to a campsite known as Pine Hollow. Reports of screams carried over the treetops. Campers described it as somewhere between a person and an elk. Angry, mournful, rising, falling, repeating every half hour. Some thought it was a prank. Others were convinced someone was being murdered. I parked the ranger truck, grabbed my pack, and hiked toward the source of the sound. The deeper I went, the more the trees narrowed the trail, drawing close like ribs closing around a heart. The sun bled out through the needles, painting everything in the last gold moments of safety before night clamps down. The first scream came from ahead, maybe 200 yards. It wasn't like any animal I've cataloged. It wasn't a call. It was a warning, a declaration, something saying, "I'm here and I know you are too." My training said remain calm, assess the situation. My instincts said turn around. I pressed forward. The second scream came later, closer, too close. I moved slower then, scanning every shadow. The pines moaned in the evening wind, but beneath that, a steady rhythm of branches like footfalls matching my pace. When I stopped, the sound stopped. When I resumed, it resumed. I swallowed hard. That's when I noticed the silence creeping in. The insects had gone quiet. Frogs muted. Birds hushed. Everything that relies on instinct for survival understood something better than I did. I turned my flashlight on just as a shape shifted between the trees. Massive. Upright. The beam caught a glimpse of fur, coarse and dark, matted with streaks of mud or blood. Shoulders too broad, arms too long, movements too smooth for its size. It ducked behind a cluster of trunks, but not before I saw the profile of its head, elongated, sloped, with a jaw that looked strong enough to snap bones like twigs. I froze. I didn't dare breathe. The scream erupted again, so close it vibrated inside my skull. Reflexively, I raised the flashlight higher, scanning the trees. What I saw next nearly stopped my heart. Just beyond the cone of light, 2 amber eyes hovered in the dark, too high to belong to any bear. 2 glowing orbs reflecting not the flashlight, but something internal, like heat, like hunger. I clutched my radio. "Pine Hollow Trail," I whispered. "Possible predator. Large, human height or taller. I need..." The crackle of static swallowed my words. The radio went dead. No power, no response, just silence. Then the thing moved. It didn't charge. It didn't roar. It simply took one colossal step toward me and paused. The ground quaked beneath that single shift in weight. My legs coiled to run, but fear nailed my boots to the soil. Then, in the faint light, its mouth opened, and I heard something I still struggle to believe wasn't imagined. Leave. The voice was ragged, like stone scraping stone. Language learned from someone who never wanted to teach it. The creature's jaw jittered, flexing an emotion almost human, but broken, wrong. Leave, it repeated. Every survival instinct surged. My body chose for me. I stumbled backward, then turned and sprinted harder than I ever had in my life, crashing through branches, lungs screaming, mind a hurricane of disbelief. Behind me, no thunderous pursuit. No crashing trees, nothing, as though its message was the only thread it needed to deliver. I didn't slow until I burst back into the campground, where lanterns flickered, people whispered, and the world seemed manageable again. I reported a large, unidentified bear reacting defensively. The department chalked it up to wildlife stress. The campers dispersed. But that night, alone in my cabin, I stared into the darkness and whispered to myself. It spoke. Not a call, not a scream, words. I confronted the thought that claws deeper than any monster. If it can speak, then it can think. And if it can think, then it can want. When I closed my eyes, all I could see were those burning eyes floating in the black, waiting for me to return and listen properly next time. I've spent years teaching others not to fear the woods, but the truth is, I fear them now. Because something out there wants me to. I thought the worst part of fear was the moment something reveals itself. But I learned it's actually the days that follow, when nothing happens and your mind feeds on the absence. Each night, I triple-checked the door, left the porch light on, kept the radio fully charged and within reach. Sleep became something I negotiated with, not something I surrendered to. The Forest Service transferred me to a broader patrol zone, more trails, more nights in the backcountry, more people who trusted me to be sure. They didn't know that certainty had been rotting inside me since the encounter at Pine Hollow. One afternoon, I was surveying a valley north of Weeping Pines, following up on a report of a cave some climbers spotted near an unmarked ravine. Caves aren't uncommon in the Cascades, but uncharted ones can be dangerous. So I went alone, GPS in hand, the sun at my back. The ravine wasn't deep, maybe 10 feet, a collapsed old lava tube, its edges jagged like broken teeth. Thorn bushes claimed most of the drop, but there was one gap wide enough to slip through if you didn't mind leaving some blood behind. I crouched, shining my flashlight downward. Darkness soaked up the beam, swallowing it after only a few feet. The air pushing out of the hole was cold, not just a chilly draft, cold like a long winter hidden underground, waiting. I decided to mark the location, reported bring another ranger back tomorrow. But as I turned away, something scraped against stone below, a slow drag like a hand sliding across rock. I froze. The scrape stopped. Every instinct whispered, walk away. Leave it for daylight and other people. But my father always taught me that fear is a compass. It points you toward the thing that will define you. So I knelt again, held my breath, listened, silence. Then one knock, just one. It echoed up through the rock and struck the air like a heartbeat skipping, a familiar rhythm, my porch, that voice, same cadence. I stumbled backward, heart thundering, eyes fixed on the hole. I knew exactly what it wanted, attention, a response, a witness. But I had nothing to give except the pounding inside my ribcage as I climbed out of there and radioed headquarters to schedule a follow-up. Only one ranger agreed to go with me the next day, Ron. He didn't like caves. When I explained the location, he sighed and rubbed that scar on his cheek. No one has business inside places the earth sealed shut, he muttered. But he still hiked the ravine with me, his boots crunching leaves that had never truly dried Deste winter. The drop looked different in the sunlight, ordinary. A bit of moss glistening, ferns stretching for daylight, no wind, no cold, as though the cave was pretending to be nothing more than a forgotten crack in the ground. I directed my flashlight downward. Nothing. No scraping. No sound. Ron stared at the gap and whispered, "This is a mouth." I frowned. "What?" He pointed to the jagged edges where roots hung like dark strands of saliva. Some holes take, and some swallow. Before I could respond, he turned away and said, Market closed. No one goes in. He didn't joke. He didn't elaborate. We documented the ravine, filed the closure report, and left. That night, Ron sat across from me at the ranger station, finishing paperwork. I could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. He signed the last sheet and stared at the window, where the trees gathered like an audience of giants. "You're hearing things," he said quietly. "Things most of us learned not to hear years ago." "What things?" I asked. He didn't answer, but I caught something in his eyes. Memory, fear, and resignation tangled together. There are people who survive the woods, and there are people who belong to them. I wasn't sure which one I was becoming. 2 weeks passed without incident. Visitors returned home with the usual stories of starry skies and friendly deer. The forest seemed to accept the pause, as if giving me time to lower my guard. That's when the radio call came in, distress signal from a solo backpacker near the northern ridge. The caller said he heard someone screaming for help inside a cave. He refused to go in, but feared someone was trapped. The coordinates froze my blood. It was the same ravine. I reached the site at dusk. The backpacker, pale, shaking, pointed me toward the drop without speaking. I told him to stay put and radio dispatch, potential rescue situation, one subject possibly trapped underground. I drew my flashlight, clipped a rope, and lowered myself in. The cold hit instantly, wrapping my skin like wet cloth. The rock felt damp, as though something had recently passed through, brushing its weight against the walls. The passage was narrow at first. Then it opened into a chamber maybe 6 feet tall, enough to crouch but not stand. The floor looked scraped, uneven, disturbed. I called out, "Hello? Ranger service. Can you hear me?" Silence. Then footsteps, but not ahead, not deeper. Behind me, I spun, flashlight quivering. The opening I dropped through was a circle of fading daylight, too high to reach without the rope, which dangled uselessly like a lifeline barely touching my fingers. "Who's there?" I demanded. "Talk to me." Then I heard it. A voice. Breathless, strained. "Help me." Same voice as before. Same inflection. But now it echoed in a place where sound shouldn't travel so cleanly. I felt my sanity peel back. I backed up, shaking, scanning every shadow. The beam caught something on the wall. Long marks, carved deep, like fingernails dragged in desperation. I traced the lines down and found cloth. Torn fabric, a piece of denim, stained dark. Thomas had been wearing jeans. Before I could think, before I could breathe, the voice came again, closer. "Help me." But this time, it wasn't pleading. It was mocking. A wet, gurgling imitation of humanity. Like something had heard those words and wasn't done practicing. I bolted, scrambling up the rope, boots slipping, rock scraping my elbows raw. The daylight widened with every frantic pull. Something below scraped against stone, following, not fast, but persistently, like it was walking with hands instead of feet. As I hauled myself over the edge, the backpacker screamed. I turned just in time to see a long, dark arm stretch out of the darkness, too long, too thick, fingers ending not in nails but in blunt, cracked tips like shattered hooves. The hand slammed against the rock, then retreated back into shadow. The voice whispered up once more, "Don't look." But I did. And in the last sliver of light before the cave mouth swallowed everything, I saw the eyes. Amber. Burning. Waiting. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping, dirt in my throat, vision shaking. The backpacker grabbed my arm, dragging me away from the ravine one step at a time. We didn't speak until we reached the trail. And even then, all he said was, "You heard it too." It wasn't a question. I filed the report. But I didn't mention the eyes or the hand or the fact that the voice had changed from desperate to delighted. Some things you don't commit to paper because truth has teeth and paper is too easy to swallow. That night in the cabin, as I bandaged my arms, the woods pressed against the windows. A breeze brushed the panes with a sound like knuckles tapping, 3 knocks, rhythmic, deliberate. I didn't go to the door because the second I acknowledged it might stop asking and start coming in. I barely slept after that night. Every dream felt like a descent back into the cave, arms reaching, voices twisting into shapes my mind refused to fully render. Days blurred into a constant state of high alert. I stopped walking close to dense tree lines. I avoided ravines. I avoided the dark. The department asked if I needed time off. I said no, because the truth was worse than fear. If I left, I'd still hear the knocking. If I stayed, at least I'd know which direction it was coming from. Ron checked on me more than usual, quietly, without judgment. He dropped by the cabin with flimsy excuses, extra rations, paperwork that could have been emailed, casual coffee at midnight. I pretended not to notice he never turned his back to the windows. One late evening, the ranger's office phone rang while I was finishing a wildlife survey report. A voice, shaking, young, said hikers were missing near Gray Step Falls. They'd heard screaming near nightfall. A single, drawn-out cry that ended in a choke. Then, silence. I remember how my heart dropped when he added one more detail. The screams sounded like they were coming from underground. I drove out with Ron. The forest swallowed the truck headlights, trees leaning inward like spectators who'd waited all day for the performance. The trail to the falls was narrow and choked with ferns. The moon hid behind smoke-thin clouds. We found the hikers' camp. Tent half collapsed, 2 packs left behind, a scattered deck of playing cards. The Queen of Hearts pressed into damp soil as if someone had tried to take it with them before vanishing. A lantern still burned, casting shadows that jittered with the wind. Ron crouched, fingers brushing a boot print. They ran, he murmured, fast and barefoot. That sickened me. Bare feet again, like Thomas. We followed the prints through brush so thick it clawed at our clothes. The trail veered toward the falls, where water crashed into a pool that glowed silver from moonlight. The roar of the cascade masked everything else until it didn't. There, beneath the water's relentless pounding, I heard a voice. A scream, gagged and struggling. Help me! But this time, it was wrong, too perfect, too rehearsed, like a recording of a memory trying to imitate pain. The tone rose and fell on the exact same pitch each time. It wasn't fear. It was bait. Ron's hand clamped onto my shoulder. His voice rasped, "Don't answer." But every part of me wanted to rush forward, tear through the spray of the waterfall, drag whoever was behind it back to air and light. That was my job, to help, to save. Ron pushed me back. "Jonah, listen. The forest is teaching you a new rule. Not every cry is a cry for salvation." The voice echoed again. "Help me." Slower this time, like it appreciated being heard. Ron pointed to the ground by the water's edge. Deep tracks. Broad. Heavy. Toes splayed wide into the mud. They circled the area, not a chase pattern, a waiting pattern, a predator's patience. "You see?" Ron whispered. "This is a hunter, and it knows exactly how humans break." I forced myself to step away from the water. My muscles burned with conflict. Duty versus survival, compassion versus instinct. A branch snapped upstream. We raised our lights. The beams shook against the trees. Mist drifted, thickening the air into something you could choke on. Then a silhouette emerged through the spray. Tall, looming, a head brushing the lower branches, arms that hung past its knees, fur slicked with water, clinging in thick ropes, shoulders hunched like it had crawled out of a pit beneath the world. Its eyes ignited, amber, familiar, focused directly on me. Ron shouted, "Back! Back now!" But I couldn't move. Those eyes pinned me like a blade. For the first time, I understood something chilling. It knew me. It recognized me. The creature didn't roar. It didn't charge. Instead, its massive arm lifted and a finger, long, cracked, bone-thick, pointed toward the forest behind us. Commanding, "Leave." Not a warning anymore. An order. My voice cracked through my teeth. "What do you want?" The creature's jaw shuddered, tongue dragging against broken teeth. "You." The word hit like a punch to the soul. Before I could think, Ron fired a flare directly into the air, a blinding streak of red, splitting darkness. The creature recoiled, retreating into mist with a speed that defied its size. Water exploded as it slipped behind the falls, swallowed by shadow. Ron grabbed me. Hard. "We're going, now." We didn't breathe until we were back at the truck. Even then, neither of us looked at the trees for fear they'd look back. He drove. I stared at my shaking hands. Finally, Ron said, "That thing, whatever it is, wants you because you've heard it. You've responded." My thoughts slammed into each other. "It's intelligent. It's hunting intelligent prey, he corrected. The official report listed the hikers as missing due to unstable terrain and possible wildlife encounter. Search teams found no bodies, no signs, just empty air where lives used to be. The publicity died down after a week. People moved on. That's the luxury of living outside the forest. Distance softens horror. Here, horror lives next door. Ron and I didn't talk about the incident, not out loud. But silence has texture, and all our silence said the same thing. We had crossed a threshold. The woods weren't just haunted, they were interactive. A storm rolled in days later, low thunder dragging across the mountains. Pine needles shuddered like millions of tiny hands riffling against one another. Rain hammered the cabin roof, turning the forest into a thrashing ocean. I tried to sleep. Then came the smell. Iron, wet fur, decay. It seeped under the door, through the vents, into my sinuses, thick and invasive, forcing me awake. Outside, the rain paused, too suddenly, like a breath held by something watching. I stood barefoot on the wooden floor, listening. 3 knocks, slow, intentional, directly beneath the bedroom window. I stared at the curtains, heart pounding inside my ribs like a trapped bird. The voice slid through the storm. Jonah. Not help me. Not leave. My name. The night swallowed every excuse I'd ever used to rationalize. There was no lost soul, no confused hiker, no bear, no myth. It wanted me. Lightning strobed, painting a silhouette against the thin fabric of the curtain, tall, monstrously tall, head brushing the top of the window frame. Shoulders so wide they blocked out the world behind them. The outline of a hand spread across the pane, fingertips reaching down toward where my face would meet the glass. Then, with a low, rattling breath, it whispered, "You belong." Fear finally cracked whatever strength I thought I had left. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over the nightstand. The flashlight toppled with me, beams spinning wildly across the room. My voice was gone, stolen by terror. The creature dragged one finger downward against the glass. Screech! A sound no human nail could make. I threw myself toward the front door, grabbing keys, slipping into boots without lacing them. I didn't look back. Couldn't. I burst into the storm, rain blinding me, headlights blurring into streaks as I floored the truck's accelerator. I didn't stop until I reached the ranger station. Light, structure, humanity, warmth. I sat in the truck, rain soaking through my clothes, and I cried. Not from pain, not from weakness, from the crushing certainty that there are things in this world that do not have lungs or hearts like ours, but they do have purpose. And tonight, that purpose had written my name in fog. Ron found me there an hour later. He didn't ask questions. He just tossed me a blanket and sat beside me while the storm clawed at the windows. "You're not the first," he finally said, "and you won't be the last." I looked at him, trembling. "What is it?" Ron stared straight ahead, at nothing, or maybe at something he could see that I couldn't. The locals call them pine spirits, old things that walked before we named mountains. They're patient, they pick someone, and once they do. He let the sentence rot in the air. The fear I'd been holding cracked open into something new, a realization that this wasn't a series of encounters. It was escalation. Something old had chosen me, and it wasn't finished. Ron didn't go home that night. He stayed at the station with me, the two of us sitting under the buzzing fluorescent lights that made everything feel too sharp, too real. I hadn't realized how much darkness could change a person until I saw myself reflected in the window, eyes wide and raw, the face of someone who had run not from danger, but from inevitability. "You need to understand something," Ron finally said, his voice low and gravel dry. "People think the forest is land. Terrain, something you hike on. It's not. It's an arena, and sometimes you're the one being tested." I stared at the floor, trying to slow my breathing. "Why me?" He shook his head. "Doesn't choose randomly. Fear, grief, guilt. It smells those things, finds where you cracked long ago, and pushes until you open." He wasn't wrong. My father's death left holes inside me that duty alone could never fill. The woods became my refuge, and maybe that made me vulnerable in ways I never understood. Ron leaned forward, elbows on his knees. There are stories around here, stories locals whisper when they think no one from the service is listening. People who vanished without a trace, people who returned, wrong, and a few who survived but never left. You're one of them now. I wiped rain from my hair, feeling the sting of wind still trapped in my bones. Then what do I do? Ron gave a hollow laugh. Survive long enough to tell your own story. The following days were a blur of daylight patrols and sleepless nights. I traded the cabin for a cot in the ranger station. The others didn't question it. They'd all seen fear become part of a man's posture. They just didn't know what kind of fear lived under mine. But the forest doesn't respect boundaries like walls or locks. On my second night at the station, I woke to a sound beyond the glass entry door. A single footstep, then another, slow, heavy, confident. The motion sensor lights remained dark. Those lights were designed to detect animals, people. Whatever walked outside wasn't triggering them. That scared me more than footsteps ever could. Then came a voice, not a scream, not a whisper, a perfect imitation of how my father used to call my name. Jonah. Not frightened, not pleading, just a gentle beckoning. My heart twisted. I stumbled to the window, drawn by reflex, by longing. But Ron's warnings echoed through me. It hunts the parts of us we want to trust the most. I didn't look out. I couldn't. The voice tried again, warmer this time. Come outside, son. Every muscle locked. I bit down on my mouth hard enough to taste blood. Tears blurred my eyes. That voice was dead. Gone. Buried beneath stone. The woods were using my grief as a lure, and grief is the one predator none of us can outrun. I stayed frozen until footsteps faded into the night, until silence suffocated everything. 2 days later, a report came in of a lost dog in the western campground, a child's pet. Terrified parents. I almost let someone else take it, almost. But saving what could be saved was the one piece of myself I still trusted. I drove out, sunset casting a final glow across needles that glimmered like blades. The family waited anxiously at their RV, the girl in tears. I knelt to her level, promising I'd find her friend. Those were the first confident words I'd spoken since the storm. The dog's tracks led into a grove, earth soft, pine cones cracking beneath each step. The forest's hush felt unnatural, as though it was holding breath again. I whistled gently, listened. At first, nothing. Then a bark, high-pitched, panicked. I ran. The sound grew sharper, echoing off stone. I skidded down a muddy slope into a clearing surrounded by towering trees. The dog was there, tail between legs, trembling beside a fallen log. I scooped him into my arms. Hey, bud, it's okay. Relief flooded me, a victory, however small. I turned to climb back up the slope and froze. Across the clearing stood the creature, not hidden, not observing, standing in full view. Its fur was dark and dripping, like it had just crawled from an underground pool. Its arms hung like pendulums, weight pulling them toward earth, but its eyes, those eyes felt like staring into a furnace. Heat, hunger, history. It didn't move, didn't roar, it simply inhaled. The sound was dry and rattling, like lungs full of dust and rage. The dog whimpered in my arms. I didn't breathe. The creature tilted its head, a gesture disturbingly human. Then it stretched one long leg forward, stepping into the last streak of sunlight. Its skin beneath the fur was mottled gray, scarred, alive with tension. I tightened my hold on the dog. I'm leaving, I whispered, unsure whether to myself or it. The creature responded, belong. The word rippled through me like a sickness. Then it took another step. A branch cracked somewhere behind me. Ron. Rifle raised, eyes dead serious. Run, he commanded. I didn't think. I sprinted up the slope, dog held tight, branches clawing at my jacket. Ron remained below, flare gun pointed. He fired. White light scorched across the clearing, searing the air. The creature recoiled, not from pain, but from disgust, like the light exposed something it couldn't tolerate. It vanished into the trees with monstrous agility. Ron caught up with me moments later, grabbing my arm. Go to the truck. Drive the family away. Now. What about you? He shook his head. I'm ending something that should have ended before you ever arrived. But as he turned back toward the woods, the creature's voice rolled through the night. No end. Ron froze. And for the first time since I'd known him, I saw fear break through his armor. He whispered, "It's older than endings." We retreated together. The family left the campground by morning, but the forest didn't relax. Shadows clung longer to the ground. Wind carried a tension that made branches shiver like bones chattering from cold. Ron told me to pack, not to resign, just to step away. Temporarily, he'd take my shifts. I'd go see my sister in Seattle, take time to breathe where trees don't watch. But as I loaded my duffel into the truck, the sense of wrongness returned. Heavy, immediate. The smell hit, wet fur, metal, and something else. Smoke. The ranger cabin. Flames gnawed at the roof, wood crackling like snapping bones. I sprinted into the clearing, horror splintering through me. Fire roared from every window, heat blasting my face. Ron was already there, shouting into his radio for backup crews. An explosion of sparks shot into the sky as the chimney collapsed, and through the flames, I saw a silhouette. The creature. Inside my cabin. Standing still, watching me burn what had once been home. Its eyes glowed through the inferno like lantern fire, and it stood perfectly unharmed. I staggered backward, throat closing. The flames might have taken the cabin, but they gave me clarity. It didn't fear fire. It didn't fear weapons. It didn't fear us. It only feared being unseen, because being unseen meant being powerless. When the last beam fell, when the flames died to embers, when the cabin became nothing but ash and iron nails, it was gone, but my name lingered in the smoke. That night, under emergency shelter lighting, Ron sat across from me and said words that carved a permanent scar into my understanding of duty. You can't run from the woods. You can't hide inside them. You can only decide whether you die here or walk out with your story intact. I stared at my burned hands, feeling the sting beneath the bandages. "Why me?" I asked again, voice cracking. Ron's reply was almost a whisper. "Because you listen, Jonah, and the pines want someone who listens." I realized then that this was not about chasing a creature. It was about deciding whether I would become the hunted or the storyteller of what hunts. Fear was no longer a thing I could escape. It was a thing I had to confront. Something ancient had taken my home, my peace, and my safety. I wasn't going to let it take my name. The forest doesn't forget, it doesn't forgive, and it never wastes its time on those it doesn't intend to keep. I understood that the moment I stepped back onto the trails after the fire, when the smell of ash still clung to the sky and the blackened silhouette of my cabin marked the ground like a warning. The creature had taken my home, but it hadn't taken my role. I was still a ranger, and this forest was still my responsibility. Ron told me I needed to leave the woods for a while, to regroup, to reclaim my strength. But strength doesn't come from running. It comes from the decision to face what terrifies you and say, "Not yet." So I stayed, not in the cabin. Its bones were smoldering ruins, but in the ranger station, surrounded by thin walls and humming lights that pretended to be protection. The forest pressed against the windows every night, a body of thousands of trees leaning closer as if eavesdropping, as if waiting for permission to speak. And always, there was the fear that something was just outside the glass. Ron checked in less often. Something in him was changing, slowly, quietly, like rot in timber. His eyes lingered longer on the tree line. He slept less, and when he did, he woke at every sound. Whatever watched me was watching him too. The burden wasn't mine alone anymore. It never had been. A missing person report came in early one morning. A hiker named Mel, mid-30s, experienced, confident. Last known location, the old creek trail that curled near Blue Feather Ridge. The same place Thomas had vanished. The same place the father and daughter had been stalked. The same place I first saw eyes burning from the dark. The pattern was undeniable. I looked at Ron. He looked at me. We didn't need words. We geared up. The hike started under a gray sky, clouds heavy enough to bruise the horizon. The wind carried a strange chill, too direct, as if it knew exactly whom to target. Ferns brushed our legs like nervous hands. Trees leaned just a little too far over the path, as if guiding us where they wanted us to go. When we reached the creek, the current was barely moving. a sluggish trickle where water should have roared. Silence sat over everything like a predator crouching low, waiting. We called for Mel. No answer. We searched the banks. No tracks. The forest wanted us deeper. Past the creek, the ground dipped toward the ravine trail, the one that led toward the sealed cave. The memory of that dark mouth tightened my lungs, but fear wasn't new anymore. It was familiar, a companion. Ron stopped suddenly, raising a hand. Ahead, across a clearing, something lay on the ground. A backpack, half buried in pine needles. I approached slowly, heart lifting and falling in the same beat. The zipper was split, contents scattered, and the dirt around it was disturbed, scraped by something dragged. Ron crouched low, fingers brushing a mark in the soil. Knees, he murmured. Someone crawled or was pulled. We followed the drag pattern, each step a tightening of dread, until the clearing narrowed and the earth swallowed the trail into a jagged hole. Another cave, not the last one, a new one, or maybe the same one, tunneling beneath the forest, connecting places that were never meant to touch. The air pouring from inside was cold, bitter, and beneath the chill lay a familiar scent. Iron, wet fur, grave-damp earth. Mel was in there. Or what was left of him. Ron looked at me, jaw tense. We go in and come out. No heroics, I nodded. Flashlights on. Radios ready. Ropes secured. We descended. The walls pressed close. Rock scraping shoulders, the tunnel breathing its cold hunger against our skin. Every step forward felt like trespassing in a place that remembered me. 10 paces. 20. Then the cave opened into a chamber. Wider, taller, the ceiling lost somewhere in blackness. My light shook across the ground and hit something pale. A hand. Mel. He lay on his side, eyes wide open, fixed on the ceiling, not with terror, but with confusion frozen into him, as if his mind hadn't understood what killed him. Ron knelt to check for a pulse, even though there wasn't one. We're too late, he whispered. I stood guard, scanning the chamber walls. Rough stone, streaked with claw marks. Deep, desperate. And overhead, fragments of torn fabric swayed from crevices like warning flags left by the ones who came before. Then a sound rolled through the cave. Not a scream, not a cry, a laugh. It echoed like wet gravel rattling in a throat too large for itself. Ron stood slowly, his eyes wide. We stepped back toward the rope. A shadow peeled itself from the darkness above. First the arms, long and jointed wrong. Then the torso. Chest broad as a door, muscles rippling beneath sodden fur. Then the head, low brow, snout of cracked bone, teeth glinting like broken glass. Those eyes. Amber, burning, ancient. It dropped from the ceiling with impossible grace, landing between us and the exit. Ron raised his flare gun. Move, Jonah. The creature inhaled, its ribs expanding, its breath scraping like stones dragged across metal. You. The words shook the chamber. Ron fired. Light detonated. The creature shrieked, a guttural roar that shook dust from the ceiling, then slammed a hand into Ron's chest with monstrous force. Ron flew backward, body cracking against rock, gasping. I screamed for him. The creature turned to me. Not rushing. Approaching, each step a claim. You belong. Its hand lifted. I reached for my flare, the only weapon I had left, but fear made me fumble. The flare clattered across the ground, rolling into darkness. It loomed over me. Breath hot and fetid, I swallowed the panic, and for the first time I spoke back. No. The creature paused, maybe surprised, maybe intrigued. I took a shaking step toward it. My father belonged here, I said. The missing belonged here, but I don't. Its growl vibrated through me, but it didn't strike. You want witnesses, I whispered. You want someone to speak your name, someone to carry your story into the world above. That's why you choose rangers. We listen. I leaned closer, fear twisting into a new shape, defiance. And I will tell the world about you, every detail, every scream, every knock. Its chest heaved, not with rage, with recognition, because I had named its purpose. I don't belong to you, I said, louder now. You belong to the stories people whisper when they're afraid to fall asleep. For a moment, the cave held its breath. The creature's eyes flickered. Then it stepped backward. The impossible. It retreated. Slowly, melting back into the darkness, breath grinding like shifting boulders until only the fire in its eyes remained. Then those, too, vanished. The chamber fell silent. I bolted to Ron, gripping his jacket. He coughed, groaning, blood trickling from his lip. Alive. We're leaving, I said. We climbed. We didn't look back. The daylight above felt like salvation clawing its way into our lungs. When we reached the trail, Ron collapsed against the trunk of a pine. I fell beside him, breathing. Alive. Alive. Mel's body was recovered. The official cause of death, exposure and trauma. His family heard accident. It was easier that way. Ron left the service 2 weeks later. The scar on his cheek deepened, as though it had always been meant to grow. He refused to live where trees could stare into his windows. I stayed, not because I was brave, because I am the only one who knows how to listen. Now, when campers ask whether the forest is haunted, I don't laugh. I tell them never to whistle at night, to stay away from caves that don't appear on the map. And if they hear knocking, never answer. I walk the trails every day, boots sinking into familiar earth. I feel the eyes from the tree line, watching. But I speak first now, and every time the wind rises through the pines, I whisper, I remember you. Because as long as someone remembers, I do not belong to the darkness. The darkness belongs to me. And I will not let it take anyone else. Not while I'm still here, not while the stories still whisper. Something in this forest has learned my name. My breath always seems louder than it should be in the pines, like the trees are leaning in to listen. That's the first thing you should know about me. I've spent more nights out here than in any house or apartment. My badge says U.S. Forest Ranger, and I've worked these mountains long enough to know their good moods, their tempers, and their secrets. But what these woods hold closest, what they whisper only after sunset, that's what no one tells you when you sign up. The locals do, though. They never forget. Before I ever wore this uniform, I was just another kid in Prescott Valley, dreaming of mountains bigger than myself. I believed forests were sanctuaries, quiet, peaceful, forgiving. The older rangers laughed at that. They'd say a forest is like a person who's been around too long. It remembers everything, especially what it lost. My name is Eli Rivera, 46 years old. I work the pine country of northern Arizona, places tourists call beautiful and old-timers refuse to camp in after dark. This job didn't make me superstitious. The forest did. When you live out here, you notice patterns. Trees grow toward the sun. Water carves the same channels. Animals circle back, generation after generation, to the exact patch of earth where they were born. So why, in a forest shaped by repetition, do the same disappearances keep happening in different places? I used to laugh at the stories people whispered, the missing hunters, the barefoot silhouettes crossing roads, the eyes glinting high in the branches where no animal should climb. I told myself fear was just nature reminding us we weren't built for its scale. But that changed the night I found the journal. It was late September, the air sharp with the first hint of autumn. I was doing a routine night patrol near an area known as Granite Basin, closed to the public after 3 hikers vanished over 2 decades. Most folks believe they fell or got lost. People like me know better. I'd parked the truck and followed a narrow trail to check for fresh tracks. My boots snapped twigs and crushed fallen needles, every step drumming through the earth like a warning. A tremor of wind breathed through the branches, smelling like wet stones from somewhere upstream. That was when my flashlight beam caught something, half buried in pine needles, just off the trail. A small leather notebook, swollen from rain. I hesitated. I don't know why. It was just a book. But the forest around me had gone quiet. No crickets, no shifting squirrels. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I crouched and picked it up. The cover was scratched to hell. It looked like claw marks, but wide, too wide for anything I documented in these woods. When I opened the warped pages, the faint beam of my flashlight revealed jagged handwriting. I know it follows because it breathes behind me and I can't turn around. The sentence was smeared, as if written with a shaking hand. I flipped ahead. Eyes too high, not human. Don't let it see you sleep. Page after page. Panic, written in ink. If someone finds this, tell my wife I tried to come home. No name. No dates. Just terror. Every instinct I had screamed to put the journal down and leave, but I couldn't. When you're a ranger, you're responsible for more than trails and signage. You're responsible for what people leave behind when fear gets the better of them. I kept reading. The final entry wasn't handwriting anymore. It looked scraped, etched by something sharp and desperate. It said my name. I closed the book. My heart hammered so violently the beam of my flashlight jittered across the trees. The pines seemed to sway closer, as if leaning in, draw the memory of what had been written. My radio crackled once, just static, and then died. That's when I smelled it, something musky, damp fur, like a predator that hadn't passed through in hours, but moments. I scanned the woods, nothing. Yet the certainty grew, curling cold fingers around my spine. I wasn't alone. A twig snapped behind me, then another. The sound was slow, deliberate, like weight shifting from one massive limb to the other. Every rational thought in my mind said bear, but bears don't move like they're thinking about how loud their steps are. Bears don't watch. They just are. The footsteps stopped. Silence poured in so deep I could hear my pulse. When I finally turned, flashlight raised like a shield, the beam landed on nothing but trees and darkness layered thick enough to swallow sight whole. But I felt its attention. A pressure. Like something with a towering shape and a face I wasn't meant to see stood inches beyond the light's edge. I don't remember getting back to my truck. The next moment burned clear in my memory is the door slamming shut, my hands shaking as I locked every latch even though I knew it wouldn't matter. I drove out faster than I ever have, gravel spitting from the tires like sparks. I should have reported the journal immediately, but I didn't. Something about it felt personal, like a warning handed off from one terrified soul to another. And that wasn't even the first time something felt wrong out here. It was only the first time I had proof. A week earlier, I had responded to a call from an older couple camping near Thumb Butte. They claimed something had rummaged through their campsite, something that walked on two legs and didn't speak any language they recognized. When I arrived, they were sitting in their RV with the blinds drawn, both pale and trembling. The woman clutched a silver cross so tight I could see her knuckles strain white beneath the skin. "We heard talking," she whispered, eyes flicking toward the tree line as if expecting the forest to answer. But it wasn't words, just sounds trying to remember how to be words. I dismissed it as fear and shadows. People panic outdoors at night, especially when the wind decides to play tricks. But as I searched their site, I found footprints, large, human-like, barefoot, much bigger than mine. There were 4 sets. 2 circled the RV, 1 approached the door, and 1 stood behind the fire pit, facing it, as though warming invisible hands. That night, I told myself if I could measure the footprints, I'd be fine. Measurements turn nightmares into facts, right? But numbers don't help when you mark the span of a print wider than your palm and longer than your boot. Numbers just become a different language for fear. I didn't become a ranger because I thought I'd be wrestling monsters. I became one because I trusted the forest and wanted people to experience it safely. But now I lie awake listening for that breathing in the dark. I feel watched every time I patrol alone. The journal sits on my desk, staining the air around it with its warnings. What scares me most isn't what I read in those pages. It's that the final line wasn't finished. It said my name, and it wanted. It cut off there, ink scraped and torn. That night, while driving out of the basin, something whispered through the open crack of my window. A low exhale of sound. A hiss carrying shape. A word. No. My name. And the pines shivered like they had heard it too. A few nights later, I volunteered for a solo patrol up near the old fire lookout tower. I told my supervisor it was just to clear my head, but in truth, I needed to prove something to myself, that I wasn't losing it, that the journal was just a hiker's panic, that the whisper in the dark was a coincidence. I set out at dusk. The pines were painted black silhouettes against a bleeding orange sky. My truck climbed the narrow dirt road in low gear, tires crunching over stone and root, climbing into quieter altitude where even the wind seemed to get tired. At the base of the lookout, the world was already shadow. I strapped on my pack, radio, and flashlight, though none of them felt like tools anymore, more like offerings. The stairs groaned beneath my boots as I ascended, the air thinning, cold threading into my sleeves. From up there, the forest stretched endless, pines rolling into canyons, then climbing mountains again, as though the earth couldn't decide where to settle. The sun dropped fully, and the world became dark ink, the kind that swallows shapes whole if you stare too long. I expected silence. Instead, I heard whistling. At first, I thought it was just the wind sneaking through the metal joints of the tower, but the rhythm was wrong. Too steady, too purposeful, 3 sharp notes, a pause, then the same 3 again, like a signal, like a warning. I stepped onto the balcony, sweeping my light over the forest. Nothing, just black treetops bowing on the moonless sky. Then the whistling stopped, and something else began. A knock. Not on the tower, but below it, at the ground level. A hard, deliberate tap, wood against metal. My heartbeat went ballistic. I leaned over the railing, aiming the flashlight down the long spine of stairs, but the beam lost itself halfway, swallowed by the dark before it could reach the earth. Another knock. Then a second knock that matched it, echoing from somewhere deeper in the trees, as if there were 2 shapes communicating just beyond sight. Every primal instinct inside me began firing warning flares. Leave. Go. Don't breathe too loud. But curiosity, that stupid, stubborn instinct that made me become a ranger, held my feet in place. Hello? I called out, voice cracking like I was 14 again. Who's there? Silence fell like a dropped curtain. No wind, no insects, no answering knock, just dead, suffocating stillness. I waited a full minute, maybe more. My breath misted in the cold. The beam of my flashlight jittered across the railing from the tremor in my hands. That's when I saw it, down in the black between the trunks. Not movement, not a shape. Eyes. 2 of them, bright as stolen moonlight, higher off the ground than any man's could ever be. Round, unblinking, staring, straight, up, at me. My lungs locked. I couldn't draw air. It felt like those eyes pierced straight into my ribs, curling around my heart and squeezing. Then it stood. It didn't rise like a human does, pushing from knees upward. It unfolded, its spine lengthening as though gravity itself released it. The eyes grew even higher. And then a sound drifted up, a low, wet exhale, the kind a predator makes when it already knows it has the advantage. My flashlight flickered once, then died. Everything vanished. All that remained was darkness and breathing. Not mine. Close. Below. Hungry. I stumbled back into the tower cabin, slamming the door. Locking it, though, I knew the lock meant nothing. The breathing never came closer, but I could feel its attention pressing against the walls, like a weight. Like the air itself had grown aware of me. Minutes blurred. I can't tell you how long I stayed like that, crouched on the floor with my back to the wall and my hand over my mouth. Listening. The breathing grew softer, then softer still, until nothing remained but the tremble of my pulse. When I dared to look again, dawn had already begun to dilute the sky from black to bruised gray. The eyes were gone, the woods looked hollow and harmless, but I didn't feel relief. I felt noticed. Most rangers don't talk about fear. We're trained to be calm, rational, in control. We're the people others look to when things go wrong. Yet, the longer I've held this job, the more I've learned that fear is just another form of knowledge, one evolution etched into us for a reason. Sometimes that reason is survival. Later that week, I drove to the ranger station before sunrise. I wanted to look up archived reports, anything to convince myself that what I saw wasn't new. Inside, I dug through case files, lost hikers, animal encounters, emergency responses, so many missing persons reports, each with a hopeful note beside them, pending resolution. But those resolutions rarely came. One file stopped me cold. A teenager gone missing 3 years ago near the exact lookout tower I had visited. Search teams found torn clothing and blood, but no body. The parents insisted something called to him in the woods, that he whispered in his sleep about voices in the trees. The lead ranger's notes listed cause of disappearance as probable cougar attack, but someone had added a comment later written hurriedly in pencil, eyes too high, prints too large, don't go alone. I sat there, gripping the page so tightly, the paper crumpled. The handwriting, it matched the journal. There's a legend in this region. Most folks laugh about it in daylight, then lock their windows at night. The locals call it the tall shadow. Not Bigfoot, not a bear walking upright, something older, something wrong. A silence walker, shaped like us, but stretched beyond nature's design. They say it lives between the pines and the dark, stepping across boundaries people aren't supposed to cross. It doesn't howl, it doesn't roar, it watches. And if it speaks, it learns your name first. Old-timers claim that once it's said your name, you never truly walk alone again, even when the sun shines, even when you're surrounded by friends. Something stays just behind you where the light doesn't quite reach. I used to think those stories were made to scare kids out of wandering too far. Now they feel like warnings those kids ignored. Warnings I ignored. I've started hearing things around my cabin late at night, a soft scuff of dirt just past the porch steps, the faint clap of two stones knocking together as though testing how sound travels through wood and window panes. And once, just once, I heard breathing under my floor, right beneath where I sleep. My dog, Ranger, half shepherd, half coward, refuses to go near the windows after sundown. He stares at the walls instead, hackles raised, tail stiff with dread. When he looks at me, his eyes say it clearly. Whatever is out there isn't supposed to be. I keep telling myself that if I could see it clearly, I'd know how to explain it. But maybe that's the forest's cruelest trick. It shows you just enough to believe and never enough to understand. Because belief is dangerous. Belief makes you look, and looking makes you a target. I didn't tell anyone what happened at the lookout, but the other rangers noticed the change in me. How quickly I volunteer for day shifts now, how I avoid walking trails I used to love. They see the extra lights I installed around my cabin, the way I flinch when a branch scrapes glass. One of them asked if something scared me out there. I laughed too quickly. No, I told him. It just reminded me why we respect the woods. But the truth? It reminded me why some people never return. That thing in the dark didn't need to chase me. It didn't need to show itself. All it needed to do was let me see its eyes. Now, every time I step into the pines, I feel the same presence keeping pace, close enough that if I reach backward, my fingertips might brush fur, or skin, or both. And sometimes, when I'm alone on the trail, I swear I hear it practicing my name. One evening in late October, I was called to investigate reports of screaming in the hills west of Lynx Lake. A family camping there had phoned in twice, insisting they'd heard a woman crying for help, but her voice sounded broken. So I drove out, headlights slicing between trunks, the forest closing in around me. The lake reflected a weak moon, just a thin slice of silver stretched across black water. The air was colder than usual, sharp as if winter was testing its reach too early. The family was waiting near the shoreline, a father, mother, and their son, maybe 8 years old. They'd already packed their tent into the car, faces ghost white under their headlamps. "What did you hear?" I asked. The dad swallowed. It sounded like a woman calling for someone, but the voice, he rubbed a hand across his face, it kept glitching, like a recording skipping. The mother added, "When it stopped, we heard something walking on two legs and the ground shook." The boy spoke last, voice barely above a frightened breath. It knew Dad's name. My stomach flipped. I scanned the trees, listening, only the soft lap of water against rock. But something about the silence felt staged, like the forest was waiting for me to ask the wrong question. "Go home," I told them. "I'll check it out." The father looked like he wanted to protest, but the instinct for survival finally overpowered curiosity. They left quickly. I stayed. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. I circled the campground, inspected for trash, paw prints, any sign of animal disturbance. The wind died and colors drained from the world until it was just black, gray, and fear. That's when the crying started. A single sob, sharp, desperate. Cutting through the trees like something wounded was dragging itself across needles and stone. Another sob, then a voice. Female, hoarse and scraped raw. Help! I froze. The sound's direction was wrong. It wasn't coming from deeper forest. It was coming from the lake. I crept to the shore, shining my flashlight over the water. At first, I saw only ripples. Then something surfaced. Just a head, pale and slick with algae. Long dark hair plastered across the face. A woman. Her lips trembled, voice collapsing into broken syllables. Help! Help! I shouted. Hold on! I'm coming! I kicked off my boots and splashed into the water, and then the head tilted, not back, sideways, like a confused animal listening. The hair parted just enough to reveal the face underneath. The features weren't right. Eyes placed too far apart, a jaw that hung too loosely like it wasn't built for speech, lips quivering through a shape that wasn't quite human. Then it smiled. Everything inside me screamed, "Run!" I stumbled backward, flashlight shaking. The head sank silently beneath the surface, then rose again 10 feet closer. Only this time, I saw shoulders, broad, covered in matted fur, not a woman, not anything that should come from dark water. And the voice, her broken plea, rose again, but now it was wrong in every way. A mimicry. Help. Its mouth struggled around each sound as if it was trying to learn. The voice scraped through the night, tearing all illusion away. I ran. Hard, water sloshing around my knees as I sprinted for the shore. Behind me, the thing surged forward, not through the water, over it, like its weight barely disturbed the lake's surface. When my boots hit dirt, I didn't stop. I kept running until my truck door slammed shut and the engine roared. I didn't breathe until I was halfway down the access road. Later, rangers searched the lake. Nothing. No tracks. No wet algae on shore. Just stillness and dark water, as if the forest had erased its mistake. But that night taught me something essential. It can imitate us, and it wants us close. Fear turns the mind into a storyteller. But what I witnessed wasn't imagination, and it wasn't alone in its attempt. 2 weeks later, an old man, local, known as Carl, stormed into the ranger station. Skin like sun-creased bark, hands trembling from either age or panic or both. It came to my window, he rasped, tall, wrong-shaped, but it knew my girl's voice, my Nancy, been gone 12 years. His eyes, watery and wild, locked onto mine. It called me Dad. That was when I noticed the scars on his forearms, long, parallel, like claw marks. His voice cracked as he whispered. I opened the window. Carl died 3 days later. Heart attack, they said. But I checked his cabin afterward, just to feel like I was honoring whatever he thought he'd seen. The window frame was shattered inward. Footprints, bare huge, tracked into the snow and disappeared beneath the pines. The locals don't speak of it openly, but their warnings all point to the same truth. This thing doesn't hunt for food. It hunts for familiarity. It learns our voices, our shapes, our grief. I started having dreams. In them, I'm walking the forest at night and the trees bow toward me like old priests. There's breathing beside me, steady, rhythmic. But when I turn, there's only shadow. I call out for help, and the echo that returns isn't an echo at all. It's another voice. My voice, but slower, curious, practicing. Sometimes I wake up with dirt under my fingernails, once with pine needles tangled in my sheets. I live alone. I should not have needles in my sheets. The encounters were growing more frequent, more bold. It was stalking closer each time, and the more fear it sensed from others, the more it evolved. That's what terrified me most. It wasn't just some ancient beast. It was adapting. It stood upright. It understood the lure of human distress. It whispered names. It masked itself in memory. And something about the cave systems up here, deep, winding caverns beneath the stone, felt connected to its presence, like the land itself had given it a place to grow without light. The locals avoid those caves like they avoid their own nightmares. I used to think it was superstition. Then I learned who carved the warnings near their entrances. Warnings I had laughed at the first time I saw them. Crude shapes scratched into rock, tall figures with 2 long arms. Another carving, stick figures with X marks over their mouths. And beneath them a single message in faded paint. Don't answer when the woods call your name. But the woods already had. They whispered it, breathed it, practiced it. Every night, the forest grows more vocal. Every morning, I wonder if I'll find fresh prints under my window, if I'll hear my radio crackle with static shaped like syllables, if I'll lose one more piece of myself to the fear that's hollowing me out. Reason feels fragile now, and darkness feels personal, because something out there wants me to stop resisting, to step just a little deeper, to trust the voice that sounds almost right, to follow the cry for help I know isn't real, but sounds exactly like someone I once failed to save. Fear has a way of shrinking the world down to a single point, a noise you can't explain, a shadow that doesn't disappear when the light hits it. For me, that point became the caves. I didn't want to go down there. Every instinct, every muscle, every echo of common sense told me that the underground belonged to whatever had been stalking these woods. But duty is a curse as much as it is a calling. People were disappearing. Voices were being imitated. Something was expanding its territory, feeding off panic the way wildfire feeds on wind. And I couldn't keep pretending this was just superstition. There was a cave near Groom Creek that locals called the Hollow Mouth because the entrance looked like a jaw, stone teeth jutting from the upper lip of a narrow crawl space. Nobody mapped it. No trails led to it. It was mentioned only in the most desperate of missing person reports. Last seen near... I studied the satellite maps. The underground network appeared huge, sprawling like a hidden second forest. That alone was enough to make me sweat. But there was another reason I had to go. A new disappearance. A park volunteer. Young, smart, confident. Someone I trained myself. She left a voicemail on my phone the night before she vanished, her voice whispering through static. Eli, someone's in the trees, it keeps saying. The message cut out. I listened to it a dozen times, letting the fear behind her words drain the heat from my blood. So I packed gear. Radio, rope, headlamp, handgun, department issue, though it felt like a toy against something that walked taller than fear itself. And then I went into the forest alone. It took me 2 hours to reach the Hollow Mouth. By then, dusk was surrendering to night. The air grew colder, weighted with the hush of pine boughs locking together overhead. My footsteps thudded against the ground like unwanted knocks. The cave entrance appeared suddenly, swallowed by creeping moss and dead ivy, a hole big enough to kneel through but not to walk upright. A tight-lunged passage leading into black. I crouched, shining my light inside. The beam hit carved shapes on the cave walls. Not natural grooves, warnings. The same tall stick figures, the same X over their mouths. But now there were more carvings, hands reaching upward, eyes scratched in frantic repetition, one figure holding another by the throat, and beneath them a phrase etched deeper than any other, "If it speaks, don't answer." My heart pounded, but duty dragged me forward. I crawled inside. The entrance swallowed daylight. Rock pressed against my back as I pulled myself deeper, stones grinding under my gloves. The passage widened eventually, opening into a cramped chamber where I could finally stand. The smell hit me then, like damp fur rotting beneath earth, heavy and suffocating. My headlamp flickered. The walls weren't stone, not entirely. I leaned close. The texture wasn't right, too soft, smooth. It was skin, not human. Thick hide, like a predator's flank sewn into the cave walls. In places it bulged as if something pulsed beneath it. That's when the breathing started, slow, wet, dragging through the dark behind me. I turned, stumbling over rocks, the beam slicing through pitch. No movement, but the breathing didn't stop. It grew, harsher, hungrier. Eli, my blood froze. The voice came from echoing along the stone like words squeezed through broken lungs. A whisper shaped by mimicry. Eli, help me. It sounded like the missing volunteer. It sounded exactly like her. No, I whispered under my breath. No, it's not her. But the voice came again, sobbing now, begging. Perfect, please. Eli, I'm hurt. Every instinct screamed. Don't answer. Don't respond. Don't let it learn. I stepped backward, eyes wide, my headlamp trembling with me. Something scraped across stone. Then I saw it. Not with light, with motion. A silhouette peeled itself from the cave wall. Massive. bending where joints shouldn't bend, arms too long, dangling to the ground like limp ropes. Its head nearly touched the ceiling. It remembered the human shape, but only after it had forgotten too much. As if the smell thickened, the stench of cave and predator and imitation. Eli, the voice cracked, glitching. Don't leave, Eli. It stepped into the beam, fur matted thick with mud and blood, bones shifting beneath skin like something still trying to get comfortable wearing them. Its mouth, too wide, worked clumsily around human syllables, lips pulling as if stitched by guesswork. Then its eyes opened, the same eyes I saw beneath the lookout tower, too high, too bright, too knowing. I stumbled back until my spine hit rock. It took another step, neck tilting like it was trying to understand me, what I was, why I was afraid. Then it copied my breathing, every panic shallow inhale, every desperate exhale. Lie. Its arms stretched forward, hand the size of a dinner plate, fingers ending in dark, split nails like broken antlers. If it touched me, I knew I would never leave that cave again. I fumbled for my gun, twisting away as it lunged. I fired once. The shot boomed, ricocheting through chambers below. The creature recoiled, not from pain but surprise, as if it had never heard defiance before. I bolted for the entrance. Behind me it moved, not running, following, letting me know it could close the distance whenever it wanted. Headlamp beam jittered wildly as I crawled, stone ripping at my knees, lungs burning. Its fingers scraped rock inches behind my boot. I burst into the cold night, gasping. The forest looked alive, branches clawing skyward, stars shaking in their fragile holes. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted through the pines. The silence behind me was worse than any footsteps, because silence meant it chose not to chase. It didn't have to. It knew where I lived. I didn't sleep that night, not because I couldn't, but because I knew if I slept it would be waiting under the floorboards again. I sat in a chair, gun on the table. Ranger curled tight against my legs. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He just shivered, eyes fixed on the door. At 3:27 a.m., the doorknob turned. Not rattled, not tested. Turned. Clockwise. Metal scraping metal. I stood, gun raised. The shivering stopped. Ranger whimpered once and buried his head under my arm. The knob twisted once more, then released. A whisper bled through the wood. My name stretched too long, the sound sliding like fingers down my spine. Illy. Then everything fell silent again. It could have broken in. It could have torn the house apart. It could have taken me under the floor, but it didn't, because fear is its hunting ground, and it wants me to stay in it, to stay awake, to weaken, to make mistakes. It can imitate voices. It can stand like us. It can speak our names. The one thing it cannot copy is patience. Mine is running out, and it knows. So the question is no longer if it will come for me. The question is how long I can hide from something that isn't hunting my body, only my mind. Because once I break, once I answer its voice, I will walk willingly into the pines and never walk back out. It was early November. Frost glazed the pines like silver veins. The air tasted bitter, metallic. I had just finished a long day shift, anything to avoid the dark. But night rises earlier this time of year. It finds you before you're ready. I was at the station alone. The others had gone home. Paperwork lay scattered around me, reports of missing hikers, unexplained noises, half-written confessions of things I could no longer pretend were natural. The power flickered, lights dimmed, the radio crackled. L.E. My name, again, drawn out like a thread. But then, Mark, a different name, a name I knew. Mark Winters, 49. Frequent camper, widower. He used to bring his daughter's old teddy bear on every trip, setting it by the fire like she was still with him. He told me once that the woods were the only place he still felt her. He had gone missing last summer. I'd helped search for him. We found his abandoned campsite, food still on the stove. We never found Mark. Now the radio hissed again. Mark, where are you? Not a threat, not a taunt, a lure. That's when I understood the truth I'd been refusing to see. This thing didn't just mimic the living. It collected the dead, their fear, their voices, their memories, to use against the next soul who dared to believe the woods were safe. I killed the radio, grabbed my gear, And for the first time since that nightmare in the caves, I went toward the voice. The moon was a thin blade as I drove into the backcountry. My headlights carved tunnels of white through the trees. Ranger sat in the passenger seat, ears pinned back, a low whine trembling in his throat. The forest felt awake, watching, waiting. When I reached the trailhead, the radio flared to life again, even though it was unplugged. "Mark, come back." I switched it off. It turned itself on again. L-E, that voice. It wasn't learning anymore. It already knew. I stepped out into the cold, rifle slung over my shoulder, flashlight cutting nervously through the dark. Ranger refused to leave the truck, tail tucked so far under it, nearly disappeared. I didn't blame him. But I couldn't leave. Not now. Not after what happened to Mark. Not after what happened to the volunteer. Not after it spoke like someone I loved and lost years ago. Someone buried deep enough that even I tried to forget. The forest still remembered. The path led me back toward Granite Basin. Back to where I had found that journal. The pines loomed taller here, crowding together. The air tasted wrong, like something rotten hid behind the bark. Every shadow felt elastic, stretching closer when I turned my back. Then I heard it, footsteps behind me, slow, measured, matching my pace. I turned, flashlight swinging wide. Nothing. Ahead, a clearing opened, a place I knew well. We had camped there once, back when trainees insisted on learning survival skills instead of paperwork. There had been laughter here. Now the ground looked freshly disturbed. Soil scraped loose, pine needles pushed aside in a circle, perfectly round, too precise for any animal. My stomach dropped. It was standing behind me. I felt its presence before I dared confirm it with sight. The air thickening, trembling, the forest pausing mid-breath. When I finally turned, it emerged from the trees like a waking nightmare. Massive shoulders shifting beneath a pelt of tangled fur, arms dragging across the ground, fingers curling through needles. But the head, the face, that was the worst of it. It had learned. Features arranged into something almost human. A jaw set right, eyes placed where they belonged, mouth forming a shape meant to comfort. Like it had pieced together a person from memory, someone familiar, someone it knew I missed. Its voice, ragged but confident, poured into the clearing. "Ellie, it's me." 2 syllables of horror. "Dad." My heart imploded. My father had died when I was 20. Cancer. Not sudden. Not mysterious. But grief doesn't care about logic. Grief will drive you straight into a monster's arms if it sounds like someone you've been aching to hear just once more. "No," I whispered. "You're not him." The thing stepped closer, mimicking the limp my father once had from a broken ankle. Its breathing matched his rhythm. Its smile stretched cruelly wide, but almost gentle. "Come home." Those words, my father's words, the last he said to me before he slipped into silence. I brought the rifle up, hands shaking so violently I could barely aim. "I'll shoot," I warned. Its reply shattered whatever strength I had left. "You didn't save me." Then, a lie made from truth. It reached out, not claws, not aggression, a hug, an invitation to surrender. I pulled the trigger. The shot hammered through the trees. It staggered, more startled than wounded, eyes flaring like dying stars. Then it screamed, a sound like a chorus of voices tearing apart. Mark, the volunteer, Carl's daughter, every life it had swallowed, unleashed at once in a blast of agony. I fired again, not to kill, to remember who I was. The thing collapsed, a heap of fur and stolen shapes. Steam rose from its body. It breathed once more, choking, glitching, trying to hold its form. Then it whispered, softer than a dying prayer, "One day you will answer." Its head rolled back and the forest swallowed its voice. Dawn came. I sat where the monster had fallen, like rifle cradled, adrenaline rotting into exhaustion. Ranger finally emerged from the truck, pressing his muzzle against my hand, grounding me in the world of the living. The clearing was empty now. No body, no blood, as if the earth itself refused to let daylight see what darkness had birthed. But it was gone, or it had retreated, to heal, to learn again, to wait. People say rangers are guardians of nature, but nature here is older than guardianship, older than us, older than stories. We don't protect it, we survive it. I filed no report. There was nothing rational to write, nothing believable. And I knew the moment I put it in ink, someone else would be sent down into those caves, someone who might not come back. Instead, I did the only thing I could do. I drove home. I locked every door. I hugged my dog, and I wrote down what happened so you would know the truth. And so that if a voice in the forest ever calls your name, even if it sounds like someone you lost, someone you love, someone who still haunts your dreams, you will remember this. The woods learn. The woods imitate. The woods hunger for familiarity. Once they know your name, you never truly walk alone again. And if they ask you to come home, don't answer. Not even once. Because out here in the pine dark places where legends breathe, spirits remember who you used to be, and they want you back.